I've been lied to. Told something was fantastic, when in reality, it was a sharp knife in my heart, brain, and feels. Different forms of this happen in life over and over again. The immortal expectation versus reality fight, with reality often being disappointing. Whether it's the McRib, U2, marriage, or the worst of them all, condoms, the reality we experience can be quite the boner killer or vaginal Sahara. Especially when these expectations pertain to something you already know is great, like my most beloved childhood icon, Spider-Man. Hero or menace, protector of your friendly neighborhood, or self-righteous vigilante. The MCU reboot of this beloved character sought to redefine him for the modern superhero epic. And what did we get? A fraud. A fugazi. Charlatan. This isn't Spider-Man.
I'm Spider-Man.
Shut up. No, you're not. Not even close. I was led to believe when Tom Holland's Spider-Man was introduced in Captain America: Civil War that this was an accurate grassroots version that would please all Spider fans with his inclusion into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Lies. This puny Parker faces very few personal life struggles compared to comic Peter, and MCU Spider-Man acts like a mega insecure tween whose secret superpower is his ability to annoy people to death. And not annoy people because of his sharp wit and dynamic fighting style that pose such a danger to all of his enemies, but annoy people by acting like a class clown that the audience would find endearing. But just remember,
because you are a character doesn't mean that you have character.
He's so damn needy with absolutely no self-confidence, and he is portrayed as a Robin instead of a Batman. But so many people have told me that they love MCU Spider-Man. I'm convinced that people simply have no idea who the character of Spider-Man actually is. They must not realize that he's a badass that doesn't take shit from anyone, even as a young up-and-comer. Now, I'm assuming you've already seen the MCU Spider-Man films, but perhaps you're not familiar with the original Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and John Romita Sr. comics from the 60s at the genesis of this legend. Spoiler alert, full-blown movie and 50-plus-year-old comic spoilers ahead. I'm going to focus mostly on establishing who comic Spider-Man is in this vid, with more of a focus on the actual MCU Spider-Man films later. Also, I think Tom Holland's a great actor. It's not his fault his character is so horrifically and disrespectfully written. Now, I'm going to use references from various sources, but ultimately, I'm showing what, in my opinion, captures the spirit of the original comic book creation. Or in other words, I'm picking and choosing sources that confirm my own thoughts and biases and disregards anything that contradicts that. Or in other words, I'm a journalist. Although I'm no comic historian, I haven't read every Spider-Man comic or anything, but I have read enough comics, watched enough cartoons and movies that give me a certain basis of the mythos of the character. And since there clearly isn't anything really important going on in the world, it's perfectly okay that I'm taking the portrayal of a fictional comic book character very seriously. I am merely pointing out that not only is MCU Peter a radical departure from comic Pete, but also a far inferior character all around. Comic Spider-Man is about the most relatable superhero you can find and is a model of self-reliance.
Hey, Pete, you're probably looking for a job now, right? Dad, maybe you can help him out.
No, I appreciate it, but I'll be fine.
No problem. I'll make a few calls.
No, I couldn't accept it, sir. I like to earn what I get. I can find my own work.
I respect that.
After Uncle Ben's death, OG Peter struggles to balance crime fighting while constantly under the thumb of everyday people problems, like his lone relative Aunt May's poor health, past due rent and mounting bills, failure to properly balance work and school life, an asshole boss, relationship failures. It goes on and on. Just about any human has dealt with these same issues, and it humanizes OG Peter and makes him a man of the people. Never in Spider-Man's early years does some rich guy fly down from the heavens and recruits Pete as a tag-along wannabe. By doing this, the MCU powers that be are seriously nerfing MCU Spidey's independent heroic prowess, relegating him to a gosh jolly gee Spider-Man that acts like he just wants to be invited to the cool kid plastics table. Instead of getting a Peter Parker and Spider-Man of true character, wit, inner strength, and most importantly, testicular fortitude, we got a Peter who goes through a fraction of the adversity of his comic book inspiration while getting a bunch of free handouts from his rich benefactor, Tony Stark. He's a damn privileged Peter Parker. But as a wise man once said,
"Well, being brilliant's not enough, young man. You have to work hard. Intelligence is not a privilege, it's a gift. And you use it for the good of mankind."
MCU Peter is far more privileged than gifted. He's given an advanced suit, an AI assistant, a 24/7 butler he can call for therapy sessions, and he's backed by a multi-billion-dollar corporation. MCU Peter is like Charlie with a golden ticket and gets more free presents than an IG model selling feet pics on OnlyFans. In the comic, allies come and go whom he learns life lessons from, but the real Peter is not one to be so needy that he hangs on another hero's every word, praying and hoping he gets their approval. Let's go back to March 1963, when The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1 was released. JFK was still president, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds was topping the box office, and everyone still agreed that the Earth was round. Peter's living in the aftermath of Uncle Ben's death and trying to figure out how to make money off his powers to pay the bills. He goes to the Fantastic Four with the hopes that he can join and make money fighting crime. They don't necessarily welcome him, and a fight ensues. "This gizmo may keep out the riffraff, Gruesome, but it's a joke to me." See, Spider is cocky if not altogether arrogant. They come to a standoff and Spider says, "Yo, how about it? I think I deserve your top salary." Reed and the others tell him they're a non-profit and that they don't want him. So he gets pissed, calls them pikers, and bounces. I love it. There goes my hero. Watch him as he goes. Comic Peter sees himself as an equal to the other superheroes of the world. He doesn't put them on a pedestal and hope they'll accept him. He's not going to hang around and beg them to join their cool little club. How does MCU Peter deal with being brushed off? Like a whipped dog.
What, does that mean that I'm an Avenger?
No.
So when's our next step? When's our next retreat, you know? Like,
We'll call you.
did you have my numbers?
No, I mean, we'll call you. Like, someone will call you.
Oh,
All right?
they're gonna call me.
I know the idea is that MCU Peter is supposed to be relatable and him fanboying at the Avengers is like how a high schooler would react. This, however, does not represent the true spirit of OG Pete. He was a high schooler that gained the ability to scale walls, crush a steel pipe like it was paper, then use his Stan Lee-given intellect to invent his own webbing. His ego naturally became huge. It was Uncle Ben's death that made him respect the power he had and give him the conviction to use his powers for good. It certainly didn't make him think he was lesser and that he had to repeatedly refer to his peers as something as ludicrous as Mr. Stark. He'd call him something like Shellhead. Can you imagine MCU Peter referring to Tony Stark as Shellhead? He wouldn't dare. He'd be afraid Tony would take his Xbox away and ground him from playing Fortnite for a week.
No, this is where you zip it, all right? The adult is talking.
Now you may be thinking, I don't care about Spider-Man's interaction with the Fantastic Four. Those movies suck. What was his first interaction with the Avengers like? Did Tony recruit Spidey while hitting on Aunt May? Did Spider-Man show up in battle mumbling and bumbling about while Iron Man kept having to check him? Even better, did Iron Man talk down and threaten Peter that he would go tattling to Aunt May about him if he didn't chill out? Glad you asked. In The Amazing Spider-Man Annual Number 3, the Avengers have a meeting to discuss whether or not they should invite Spider-Man to join them. They go back and forth debating it, but then decide they'll invite him to take part of a test to prove his worth. They set out searching for the wall crawler, and Thor, the god of thunder, locates him. You'd think Spider would be jumping with joy at the opportunity to join the Avengers, but he's actually taken back and low-key offended cause A, he didn't ask to be in the Avengers, this is all out of the blue, and B, he believes his resume speaks for itself. Why should he have to do a test? Thor's a bit pushy, so Spider mocks him and says he'll think about it. Peter then weighs the pros and cons of joining the Avengers. On one hand, he'll get respect from old libelous JJ. On the other, he'll have to take orders. It may interfere with his studies and friends that he's just starting to make at school. But most importantly, he's afraid of the toll it might take on Aunt May. But, after thinking about it, Peter impulsively decides that he has an obligation to mankind to give it a shot. He then shows up to Avengers HQ and is given a warm welcome from the team. But, like initial superhero meetings usually go, they quickly start butting heads. Look at what Spider says here. Now hold it, Shellhead. I'm not some nobody who walked in here hat in hand for a handout. If you don't want me to join, say so. I'll promise not to cry. Does that sound like MCU Spider-Man?
I can keep this suit? What, does that mean that I'm an Avenger?
No.
So when's our next step? When's our next retreat, you know? Like,
We'll call you.
did you have my numbers?
No, I mean, we'll call you. Like, someone will call you.
Oh, they're gonna call me.
Let's continue. Peter gets mad at himself for losing his temper. The other Avengers try to calm him down, but a good old fisticuffs breaks out. See, Peter is a teenager and is a loner, doesn't take kindly to authority or being talked down to. Anyone trying to belittle him just pisses him off and is going to be met with a sarcastic insult, if not a physical altercation altogether. Now I understand that we're comparing a character that was invented in 1962 versus a modern adaptation 55 plus years later. And sure, back in the 60s, kids were rebellious, and today's youth are very respectful of authority figures and never question the establishment. So maybe giving MCU Peter a rebellious side would have been too unrealistic and unrelatable for today's kids. Anyway, back to the story. Everyone calms down, and the Avengers task Spider-Man to bring back the Hulk, who has gone missing. And since he's new to this whole team thing, he doesn't even stick around for them to give him some pointers on where he could find him. He just leaves. Spider then finds the Hulk, and they start going all rumble in the concrete jungle. He desperately tries to corral the Hulk, but then feels bad for him and his inner struggle and stops fighting. After the confrontation, he swings by the Avengers HQ and lies to them, saying he couldn't find the green gloop, and peace. And just like any human would, Peter immediately starts having second thoughts and is kicking himself for not jumping on the chance to join the most heralded group of heroes on the planet. So what did this adventure tell us? That Peter's a loner, sees himself as an equal to the Avengers, mocks anyone that questions his validity, and has tremendous heart as he values a fellow conflicted superhero more than he does his own social status. What do we learn from MCU Peter's first interaction with the Avengers? That Peter is a fanboy, answers to and takes orders from Tony Stark, shuts his mouth, and knows his role. There's so much the MCU does right. So many characters they do an incredible job of translating onto the big screen. I just don't understand why Spider-Man got the naive sidekick treatment. As a kid, I looked up to and related to Spider-Man because he was a symbol of independence and always had the courage to stand up to authoritative figures. It saddens me MCU Spider-Man doesn't live up to the original. More so, it saddens me that millions of people will take this wimp simp as the de facto Spider-Man. And there, I've said it. I've said it and I don't care who knows. First of hopefully many videos. Stay blessed.